All right, we'll move on to the carbon tax debate as it's been running this week. I don't know whether you agree with me to begin with the premise that it didn't have a whole lot going for it as debates go, and if that's the case, who does that work with?
Look, I mean, I think the Coalition has absolutely captured this debate and has actually absolutely set the terms of it. They've even set the language of this debate. So we had both sides. We had Gillard and Abbott going out, you know, in desperation almost on I think it was Monday, doing enormous amounts of interviews, both trying to spin their side of the case. I think the thing that Tony Abbott really has going for him is where Gillard talks about averages and talks about statistics and Treasury modelling, which all shows a very modest impact, as they say. Tony Abbott, all he has to do is come back with one electricity bill, one example of a small business that's worried about its overheads, and he can win the argument, I think, on those terms. And
the pressure, David, is on the government anyway because of what the polls say about the issue. That it's an incumbent upon Labor to persuade people to change their view, not the other way around.
Absolutely. The polls are sort of locked down there on very, very hostile to this. And you're talking to somebody who opened his power bill a couple of days ago, and it was just a whopper.
But that didn't reflect the carbon tax.
I know it doesn't, but everywhere across this country, people are opening these enormous power bills, which they are being led to believe are about the carbon tax. But I've been with the Leader of the Opposition a couple of times over the last couple of weeks while he's been making visits to factories, and one fantastically wonderful visit to the RSPCA in Canberra. It's interesting for me because this is him complaining on behalf of business. Business isn't actually complaining on its own behalf. And I had a moment at the wheelie bin factory on the Central Coast the other day with the man who owns the wheelie bin factory, and I said to him, he was complaining about a $188,000 extra electricity charge. I said, "What's your turnover?" He said, $85 million. I said, "Well, you know, the carbon tax," and he said, "Oh, look, it's not a biggie." Now, the business out there is not actually raging that this is a biggie, and so Tony Abbott is left to do its work for it. Whether he can sustain that for a year is really doubtful to my mind.
George, what on that point? For how long can this be sustained?
Well, I actually think that this week was sort of like a non-event in terms of the debate, but the next question in the voter's mind, if the voter actually cares about this issue 12 months from now, is what happens under an Abbott government? Does this thing get rescinded? You know, is the blood pledge honoured? Well, probably not. Depending on how the Senate shapes up. But even if you could have two elections to knock something like this off, then you're in this strange space, and you know, you'd never want to go in politics promising to cut prices by 10% on anything, because it will never happen. The Coalition are going to have the ACCC running around insisting that businesses reduce prices by 10%. Look, Kim Beazley had this particular problem going into the...
Sorry, just before you go on, just further on your point, though, are you suggesting that perhaps in Tony Abbott's best interest if the thing is not repealed? The government seem to be suggesting that that's really part of their strategy, that they know they'll try, but they won't be able to repeal it.
Yeah, I'll take a step back. I don't think the electorate expects this thing to be repealed even though they don't like it, because there hasn't been a tax in the history of the Federation that got taken off without another one being put in its place. There simply isn't any record anywhere in Australian political history of a tax being taken off and something not filling the hole in the budget. So we lost the wholesale sales tax, we've got the GST in its place, for example. Now, the thing is that the electorate will probably look at this issue 12 months from now, and we can be guided by the history of Kim Beazley's rollback in 2001. Yeah. At the point that Kim Beazley tried to raise the issue again, and people probably have already forgotten this, but rollback involved the removal of the GST from electricity and gas prices, and he was going to save you $2 a week on your power bill.
There was a huge groan when he raised it again. They
groaned, yeah, and I actually saw, I actually saw the internals that the Labor Party did mid-campaign in 2001, and the GST turned out to be, for the first time in the first tracking poll they took, a net negative for Kim Beazley, because people did groan. We're still talking about this thing. I think people overestimate how engaged the public are on the specifics of tax issues. They do understand what happens to them in the hip pocket, but you know, you're asking them to think that between now and 2015 we're basically going to be running the parliament, maybe running 2 elections to do it, to knock off something that, as this last week has demonstrated to us, doesn't amount to much.